From his second-story Brooklyn brownstone window, David watched as his wife, Jessica, threw her arms around Mark Johnson, a guy who was supposed to be his closest friend. It was their 5th date, and David, glued to the window, caught snippets of their conversation, enough to piece together their scheme to further humiliate him. He heard Mark state, in no uncertain terms, that he wanted a whole week with her. Jessica brushed him off. "Not a whole week, Mark," she purred. "Maybe a weekend, but only if—" "If what?" Mark asked, his voice dripping with anticipation. "If you get him to pay for it," she replied, a sly smile in her tone. Mark chuckled. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed. "I'm swimming in cash compared to him. I'll pay for it." No, you're missing the point," Jessica corrected, her voice laced with a cruel amusement. "The most important part of all this is—" "Is what?" he pressed, eager to hear. "Humiliating David," she declared. "Come on, admit it, you get off on humiliating him, don't you? Pushing him around, making him feel like—" "Well, he kind of is," Mark started to say. "He's my best friend, you know," Jessica interrupted, her voice dripping with false concern. "You love humiliating him almost as much as I do." "Look, Jess, let's drop this charade," Mark pleaded, his tone shifting. "Come away with me. Ditch that loser. I want to marry you. Spend the rest of my life with you." Jessica laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Tell you what, stud," she purred. "Let me get him to foot the bill for a hot, dirty weekend, and we'll see, okay?" Mark sighed, exasperated. "Oh, it'll be dirty, all right," he muttered, getting back into his sleek black car. "I'll call you soon. But don't keep me waiting too long. You're already killing me here." She watched him drive off, then turned towards the brownstone she shared with David. Walking inside, she began to unbutton her blouse as she headed upstairs. Reaching the bedroom, she saw David sitting on the edge of the bed. She walked in, letting her blouse fall to the floor, revealing she was naked underneath. She sauntered into the bathroom, door wide open, and examined her reflection in the mirror. "You probably heard what we were talking about," she said, her voice echoing slightly. "I'm leaving you for Mark. We're going on a dirty weekend somewhere, and you're paying for it. Soon I'll be leaving you for good to marry him. I've been paying ever since I married you 3 years ago," David said, his voice barely a whisper, laced with a profound sadness. "I thought we were good. I've done nothing but love you. Don't you love me?" She snorted, a sound devoid of warmth. "How could I possibly stay in love with you?" she asked, dripping sarcasm. "You're nothing but a wimp who lets his best friend date his wife." She saw his shoulders slump, a silent admission of defeat. "Oh, grow up," she snapped. "Is that why you've been disrespecting me these last few months?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Weakly," she corrected, her tone dismissive. "Why do you think?" she retorted, her eyes narrowing. She saw him look at her, a flicker of something in his eyes, maybe lust, maybe despair. She snorted again, shaking her head. "Don't even think about it, wimp," she sneered. "There's no way I'm letting you touch me with that pathetic little thing of yours. I'm calling a real man to come over and do me good and proper. You can sit in the chair and watch if you want. Maybe take notes. Maybe I'll let you suck his come out of me if you promise to be good." "Damn you, Jessica," David said, finally rising from the bed, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. She watched as he walked towards the door, descending the stairs. She followed him, her curiosity piqued. She saw him reach for the front door. "Where are you going?" she taunted. "Off to pout somewhere. Maybe cry on your mama's shoulder like a baby," she asked sarcastically. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a deep, heartbreaking sadness. "I've taken all I can from you," he said, his voice low but firm. "And I swear I will take no more. Goodbye, Jessica." He slammed the door behind him. She heard his car door open, then slam shut, followed by the engine starting. A few seconds later, she watched from the window as his car disappeared down the Brooklyn street. Where was he going? She wondered, a flicker of unease in her chest. She shrugged it off. Him, she thought. Good riddance to bad garbage. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number. "Hey, lover," she purred into the phone. "Wimpy's gone. So why don't you come over and fill me up?" 3 days later, Michael pulled into the driveway of the brownstone, opening the garage door with the remote from his car. He drove in and closed the heavy door behind him. Grabbing his briefcase, he strode purposefully into the house. Jessica was sitting at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of coffee. He said nothing to her as he headed straight for his home office. Curiosity piqued, Jessica followed him to the office door and tried the handle. Locked. Odd, she thought. He never locked this door. She knocked on the heavy wooden door and turned the knob again, finding it still locked. Then she heard the distinct click of the lock disengaging from the inside. Opening the door, she saw him at his desk, staring intently at a map on his computer screen. She knew he was in the middle of designing a new condo development near one of the upstate lakes, and figured that's what he was looking at. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice curt, almost cold. For a moment she was taken aback. He had never spoken to her so abruptly before. But then again, she realized, she had been rather disrespectful to him recently. "I was just concerned," she said, attempting a softer tone. "You left 3 days ago, and I haven't heard from you. I tried calling your cell, but you never answered." "I'm sure you were," he said, the sarcasm dripping from his voice. Jessica paused, studying him. Was this really her David? He looked like David, sounded like David, but there was something subtly different about him. Maybe she had pushed him too far. She tried to bridge the gap, a reflexive habit from their earlier years. "Don't you want to give your wife a kiss?" she asked, attempting a playful tone. "It's been 3 days since I last saw you." He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense, almost clinical, as if she were some specimen under a microscope. He slowly shook his head. "No," he said, his voice flat, turning back to his computer screen. "Please close the door on your way out." Jessica was genuinely confused now. Her David never refused her advances, always kissed her whenever he could. This man was distant, cold. She closed the office door and retreated to the master bedroom to grab her phone. She dialed Mark's number. He answered on the first ring. "Jake, he's back," Jessica said, her voice laced with worry. "But something's wrong. It's like he's a different person. He wouldn't even kiss me when he came in the house." "Don't worry about it, sweetie," Mark said, his voice reassuring. "He's probably just realized you're leaving him, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. I'll be over tonight, and we'll get it all taken care of. Just let me talk to him for a few minutes, okay?" "Okay," Jessica said, still uncertain. Michael in his office had overheard her half of the conversation. A faint smile played on his lips as he turned back to his computer screen. That night, Mark's car pulled into the driveway. Jessica opened the front door and greeted him with a sloppy kiss as he entered. "Where is he?" Mark asked, his voice eager. Jessica pointed towards the office door. "He's been in there all day," she said. "Let me have a few words with him alone," Mark said, striding towards the office door. He knocked, finding it locked. "Mike, it's me, Mark, your friend. Can we talk for a few minutes?" The lock clicked, and Mark entered. "Close the door behind you," Michael said, his voice calm but firm as Mark stepped inside. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to an empty chair across from his desk. Mark sat down, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Michael poured himself a glass of amber liquid from a decanter. "Aren't you going to offer your friend a drink?" Mark asked, attempting to lighten the tense atmosphere. Michael looked at him for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. "Friend? Are you really my friend, Mark?" Michael asked, his voice quiet but sharp. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Jessica was right. This was not the weak beta male he was used to dealing with. "Of course," Mark said, forcing a smile. "I'm your best friend, remember?" Michael chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Best friend," he repeated, the word dripping with irony. "Tell me, Mark, what kind of friend steals his friend's wife?" "Mike, I'm sorry," Mark began, his voice laced with insincerity before Michael cut him off. "You want Jessica, right?" Michael asked, his tone direct, devoid of emotion. Mark nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "How much is she worth to you?" Michael asked, his eyes fixed on Mark's. "I don't know what you mean, Mike," Mark stammered, feigning confusion. "Don't play dumb with me, Mark," Michael said, his voice hardening. "You're a savvy businessman. You know there's always a price to be paid in any negotiation. How much?" I don't know," Mark said, genuinely unsure of where this conversation was going. "What do you have in mind?" "I really like that new Bentley of yours," Michael said, his gaze steady. "How much did you pay for that thing?" "I paid over $500,000 for it," Mark said, slightly defensively. "I take it it's paid for, right?" Michael asked, his voice still flat. "Of course," Mark confirmed, his unease growing. "That would be a good start," Michael said, taking a sip of his drink. "What?" Mark asked, incredulous. "You want me to hand over my Bentley in exchange for Jessica?" Michael smiled, a cold, unsettling expression. "Along with 25% of your net worth," Michael added. Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's over $50 million, Mark exclaimed, his voice rising. "You can't be serious." "It's exactly 52,531,892.25 according to my research," Michael said, his tone precise and unwavering. "And I am serious. Very serious. You want Jessica. That's my price." "That's highway robbery, Mike," Mark protested, his face flushing red. "You'll never get away with it." Maybe, maybe not," Michael said, shrugging, sipping his drink again. You want her, although God only knows why, and that's my price. I tell you what, you agree to my offer without condition, and I'll even make sure the two of you spend the rest of your lives together. Isn't that what you want? Well, yeah, Mark said hesitantly. I would love to spend the rest of my life with Jessica. Michael smiled again, the same chilling expression. Agree to this, and I'll even make the two of you a celebratory dinner, Michael said, his voice almost jovial. What do you say? I'll need some time to think it over, Mark stammered, completely thrown off balance. Michael nodded slowly. I'll give you until noon tomorrow, he said, his voice final. Now, please close the door on your way out, he added, indicating the meeting was over. Mark got up, thoroughly confused and disturbed, and left the office. Michael watched through the curtains as Mark and Jessica left the house together. He smiled, a genuine, satisfied smile, and made a few calls. Jessica didn't get home until early the next morning. He could hear her and Mark talking in hushed tones in the driveway. Just think, Mark, Jessica said, her voice giddy. In a couple of days, we'll be able to start our new lives, free of Mike. Come on, let me come inside and get a taste of this, Mark added, his voice thick with desire, grabbing Jessica's backside. She giggled and playfully pulled his hand away. Soon enough, she said, her voice teasing. I can't wait to have Mike serve us like a waiter. She kissed him quickly and watched as he drove off. She entered the house and noticed a light still on in her husband's office. Was he in there all this time? She wondered. She tried the door, but it was locked. Mike, she called out softly. Go away, Michael said, his voice muffled but firm. Jessica decided not to push it further. She was more than just concerned about her husband's strange behavior now. She went upstairs to the master bedroom, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. The next day, Michael received a text from Mark. Deal. He replied with an offshore account number and instructions that he would be monitoring it to ensure the transaction was completed. Within a couple of hours, he verified the full amount had been transferred and instantly moved it, splitting it up between several other accounts that only he had access to. He sent a text to Mark and Jessica. Dinner tonight on me. Be here 7 p.m. sharp. He headed out to a gourmet market to get what he needed for the night's meal and was back in an hour, working in the kitchen. He loved to cook, and there was something bittersweet about tonight's meal. Jessica got home around 6 o'clock that evening and went into the kitchen. She had never known her husband to cook, but he seemed to know his way around the kitchen with a practiced ease. Whatever he was making, it smelled divine. I didn't know you cooked, she said, her voice softer than it had been in days. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, before replying, There's a lot about me you don't know. His tone was devoid of emotion. Maybe if you'd stayed home now and then, you would have learned something. He turned back to his cooking. I did learn to fend for myself, though, she countered, a hint of defiance returning to her voice. Now go get ready, he said, ignoring her remark. Your date will be here soon. She tried to kiss him on the cheek, a hesitant gesture of reconciliation, but he moved his head to avoid her touch. She backed off, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. What have I done? She whispered to herself, a dawning horror starting to creep into her consciousness. A few minutes before 7 p.m., Mark showed up and rang the doorbell. Michael answered the door and let him in. Mark handed him a set of keys to the Bentley and the signed paperwork as promised. "I'm parched," Mark said, attempting a casual tone. "Can I have something to drink?" "Thank you for living up to your promise," Michael said, pocketing the keys, ignoring Mark's request for a drink. "I'll be giving you and Jessica something to drink soon." Jessica came downstairs a few minutes later, breathtakingly stunning in a short, backless black dress that left very little to the imagination. Michael noticed she had taken off her wedding rings. She walked into the dining room as Michael pulled out a chair for her. She offered him a small, tentative smile as she sat down, but he didn't return it. Mark sat down as well, grinning like a Cheshire cat. "You look lovely, my dear," he told her, kissing her hand. "And I see you've taken off your rings. Good." She smiled, a genuine bright smile, as Michael brought 2 flutes of champagne and set them down on the table. He went back to the kitchen and returned with a large covered dish. He removed the lid, and they both inhaled deeply, taking in the rich aroma of Michael's homemade lasagna. "That smells divine, Mike," Mark said, his earlier unease seemingly vanished, replaced by his usual arrogance. "Perhaps you missed your true calling." Michael said nothing, his face impassive as he served 2 generous helpings of lasagna, one on each plate. Jessica looked at him, her brow furrowed slightly. "Aren't you going to join us?" she asked, a flicker of hope in her voice. Michael slowly shook his head. "No," he said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. "This is your dinner. Enjoy." He stood back and watched as the lovers toasted each other, clinking their champagne flutes together, and took their first sips. He retreated to his office, a grim smile playing on his face. He glanced at his watch. Any time now, he thought. Sure enough, a few minutes later he heard 2 soft thumps from the dining room. Peeking into the room, he saw Jessica and Mark, slumped over the table, their faces resting in their plates of lasagna. Good, he thought. They would be out for at least 6 hours. He quickly changed clothes into dark, practical attire and got to work. He stripped them both naked, their unconscious bodies limp and unresisting. He then meticulously tied their arms and legs together, binding them tightly with heavy rope. Grabbing a wheeled cart from the garage, he carefully maneuvered the 2 bound figures out of the house, wrapping their intertwined bodies with heavy chains he had purchased earlier that day, attaching heavy weights at intervals along the chains. He placed ball gags in their mouths, just in case they woke up before he reached his final destination. It wasn't easy, but he managed to wrestle both of them inside a large canvas bag he had purchased specifically for this grim occasion. Using the cart and a portable engine lift, he hoisted the heavy bag into the trunk of Mark's Bentley, then closed and locked the lid. He got into the driver's seat of the luxurious car and headed out of Brooklyn, driving south towards the dark, still waters of the New Jersey Pine Barrens. After reaching his predetermined destination, a secluded boat ramp on the edge of a vast, inky lake, several hours later, he noticed movement from inside the bag in the trunk. He stopped the car, cut the engine, and opened the trunk lid. 2 groggy, confused heads popped out of the bag, blinking in the dim moonlight. Jessica and Mark looked around wildly, their eyes widening as they took in the desolate surroundings. Fear began to dawn on their faces. Michael approached them, calmly taking a small taser from his pocket. "If you promise to remain quiet, I'll take the gags out and answer any questions you might have," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But if you scream, I promise you won't like the results," he added, holding up the taser, a silent threat. They nodded their heads rapidly, their eyes wide with terror. Michael pulled the ball gags out of their mouths. "Where are we?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling, utterly terrified. "Who are you? What's going on?" "Yeah," Mark stammered, his usual bravado completely gone. "What the hell is going on?" "According to my GPS," Michael said, his voice cold and detached, "this is the exact location where your husband killed himself." "Killed himself?" Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper, confusion and dawning horror mixing in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Yes," Michael continued, his gaze unwavering. "He told me all about the way you had been treating him these last couple years. Cutting him off from sex, cuckolding him, humiliating him." Michael paused, then added, "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot my manners. You probably think I'm Mike. Actually, I'm his twin brother, Michael. We not only share DNA, but we happen to have the same first name and the same middle initial. I warned him about you, Jessica, but he wouldn't listen. You know, I came this close to saying something when the preacher said, 'If anyone has reason why these two should not wed.' But I didn't," he added, holding up two fingers very close to each other. "You see, Jessica, while Mike and I have a lot in common, we're actually quite different. He was an easygoing man who got along with everyone, unlike me. Confrontation just didn't suit him. He loved you with all of his heart and was willing to put up with practically anything to make you happy. On the other hand, I saw right through you from the beginning. I knew you were a conniving bitch who would cheat on him the first chance you got. I hoped I was wrong, for his sake, but unfortunately, I was right," he finished, his voice dripping with contempt. "Mike never said anything about having a brother?" Jessica whispered, her face pale. "No, that was my insistence," Michael said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You see, officially, I don't exist. I'd tell you why, but then I'd have to kill you," he laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Oh, wait, I know it's dark, so you probably don't recognize your surroundings," Michael added, after he finished laughing at his own dark joke. "We're at the deepest part of Bottomless Lake, the same place where Mike ended it all just a few days ago. You see, he couldn't take what you had done to him anymore, and he took the easy way out. I tried to stop him, but he was inconsolable." Tears were now streaming down Jessica's face. "He killed himself?" she asked again, the question laced with disbelief and a dawning sense of guilt. "I never wanted him dead," she sobbed. Michael sneered. "You yourself said you didn't love him. You may as well have put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger." Michael turned his gaze to Mark. "And you," he said, his voice hardening. "You pretended to be his best friend. You never answered my question. What kind of friend steals his friend's wife?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "The truth is, you never were his friend. You used him to get what you wanted. You enjoyed pushing him around, cuckolding him, humiliating him at every chance. But you promised me we'd spend the rest of our lives together, Mark protested, his voice laced with a desperate plea. You lied to me. You cheated me. Michael laughed again, a cold, mirthless sound that echoed across the still lake. I told you the two of you would spend the rest of your lives together, Michael said, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. I just never told you that your lives would be cut drastically short. So yes, you will spend the rest of your lives together. You'll even die together. Rather fitting, since the two of you conspired against my brother. Please, don't do this, Jessica begged, her voice choked with sobs. Michael looked at her, his face devoid of pity. Mike told me he said those same words to you before you humiliated and cuckolded him, Michael said, his voice mimicking her earlier cruel tone. But you just laughed in his face and told him to suck it up. Well, suck it up. You're crazy, she screamed, her voice rising in hysteria. You'll never get away with this. Michael shrugged, a gesture of indifference. Maybe, maybe not, he said, his voice calm and detached. But once your suicide letter is found on your computer, it won't matter. I have to admit, though, it is a touching letter. He paused, then changed the subject abruptly. You do know that no one has ever found the bottom of this lake, right? And there's enough weight on that chain around you to make sure your descent is rapid. I estimate you two might last 60 seconds at most before you become unconscious. You might even live a few minutes afterward. At any rate, enjoy. Michael opened the bag fully and tipped it over, sending the two bound figures tumbling into the dark, icy water. He stood on the edge of the boat ramp and watched as the surface of the lake erupted in frantic splashes and bubbles. Soon the struggling subsided and the bubbles ceased. Michael started the boat's motor and headed back to the dock, using the marina lights as a guide. He parked the boat, turned off the engine, and jumped back into the Bentley. He made a mental note to incinerate the canvas bag later to eliminate any trace evidence. He pulled out his phone and sent a text message. Done. A reply came back almost instantly. Thanks, bro. Enjoy the ride,